Good morning, everybody. It's great to see everybody this morning. Let's start off by singing and standing and clapping and whatever you guys want to do this morning. All right. One, two, one, two, three, four.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to fellowship. I missed you guys last week. I was gone, and it just reminded me how important it is for me to be here every Sunday morning and to fellowship with you people. It's great to fellowship this morning, great to talk to you guys, and I'm sure we'll get a chance to do that later. But I'm excited to worship now, and I call you to worship in the only way I know how, and that's to pray. So pray with me. Father, we thank you for this morning. We thank you for the sunshine. We thank you for allowing us to get together as a group of believers who just want to worship you. We're so thankful for your salvation and for everything that you do in our lives each and every day, whether we notice it or whether we don't. Lord, you're always working. I just pray that you would be glorified in our service this morning. I pray that we can worship you with everything that we have. And in your Son's precious name I pray this morning. Amen.
Stand as we continue our worship together. 2, 3, 4, or wait, no. 1, 2, 3, 1. Ready?
Watch and pray, find in me thine all in all. Jesus paid it all to him I owe. Sin has left a crimson stain, he washed it white as snow. Oh dead.
You may be seated.
Hi, I'm Pam. Now, I'm filling in this morning. A scripture reading, Matthew 5, 1 through 12, as Pastor continues the series on the Beatitudes. Follow along as I read. Now, when he saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will seek God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of their righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you.
One, two, one, two, three, one, ready.
there, then it went away. This morning, from Matthew chapter 5 and verse 6, God blesses the hungry and the thirsty for righteousness. We have learned that the Beatitudes of Matthew 5, 1 through 12, each begin with that one Greek word, makarios. It's makarios. And again, many Bible versions kind of translate that in somewhat of a secular nature, a usage of that word, such as fortunate or happy. But there's much more to this kind of blessedness, we've learned, than just happiness or good fortune. Because makarios has a Semitic flavoring, especially here in Matthew's gospel that was written primarily to a Jewish audience. And it's related to a Hebrew word that speaks of a very deep, abiding inner joy that is known by those who have experienced the blessing of God's promises, especially God's covenant promises. And so in the mouths of these Greek-speaking Christians, this Hebrew-flavored word, makarios, meant to be a privileged recipient of divine favor. A privileged recipient of divine favor. You know, I used to watch, and especially about the time I was driving out here going to seminary, and so I had a lot of radio and listening time, and this was before podcast and all that kind of thing, and so I used to listen to the news channels, the talk radio, all the time, and you know, I'd listen to you know, to that for just hours and hours a day. But one day I realized that it was really having a negative effect on me, especially emotionally, because I realized I was aggravated most of the time. And I was just, you know, that just by the lack of justice and the equity and the peace in this world, and maybe some of you are right there at that place as well. And I catch myself every once in a while as I get more of a diet of that on occasion, feeling the same way. And my theology, my dispensational theology had taught me that there was going to really be no complete peace or justice on this earth until Christ comes back and he institutes in a realized sense his kingdom, and he rules the world from his throne, and then there would be perfect peace and justice and equity and all those things that we long for in our hearts. And every knee will bow and every tongue will confess Jesus as Lord. And until that time, I just, you know, I just felt like I was doomed to live in this ongoing state of just tension and aggravation. And I lived that way, just constant state of frustration. And I think part of that was because I felt powerless to really change anything. You know, I could see the inequity and injustice and the partiality and you know, the racism and all the stuff that we see around us. I just couldn't do anything about it, and it was incredibly frustrating. And so there was this constant kind of low-level seething, this bubbling under the surface of my life that I felt like I was capable of exploding at any time under the right circumstances. And unfortunately, sometimes I did. But my peace of mind was greatly enhanced when I began to turn on the news only for the weather and the radio only to listen to music. Now, while my response to the lack of justice and equity in the world was wrong, my desire for that, my desire for justice and peace and righteousness and all of those things that we don't see as we look at the world around us now, and even in our own community, that was a good thing. We should desire that in our lives. And this fourth beatitude before us today, it's a pronounced blessing on those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, it says there in Matthew 5:6. God blesses, in some sense, those who hunger and thirst, those who intensely desire for uprightness, for right to prevail. And such a person is blessed in an insatiable, who possesses that insatiable appetite for that, for what's right, a drive for prevailing justice. In fact, some of the more modern versions translate that word righteousness as justice. As justice. Justice is the maintenance of uprightness, and that's kind of what that word means. To maintain a true uprightness, to maintain that. And who doesn't want that? Who doesn't want right to prevail? We do. We all do. Who among us isn't grieved because of what we see around us, because of the corruption and the inequity and the moral compromise, the gross lack of integrity in our society? My goodness, we live in a country where babies can be legally killed, where children are murdered in their classrooms, where children are groomed by teachers, sometimes preachers, for their own personal gratification and agendas. It's sad. It's maddening even. Aren't you weary of wrong being called right and condoned, while right is called wrong and condemned? It's maddening. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. They will be satisfied. And we'll explore what that means in just a moment. Now, this beatitude at first glance really makes no apparent sense. on so many levels, it doesn't seem to make sense. How can anyone be blessed with the blessing of being satisfied while living in this world of injustice that pushes us almost to cynicism sometimes, to the cursing of an insatiable cynicism? How can we be filled or satisfied in any way? Even on the basis of its bare language, how can a hungry person be satisfied? How can a thirsty person be satisfied or blessed? You know, we see pictures sometimes on television of people who are truly starving. Now, I don't want to minimize those who are hungry. We have hungry people in our own community, and not to minimize that in any way, but I'm talking about, you see those pictures of those children with distended bellies who really are starving, who really are hungry, who really are thirsty, and they don't look blessed in any way. It doesn't make sense that those in this perpetually dissatisfied state of hunger and thirst can be called special recipients of God's favor. Furthermore, our experience tells us that such constant dissatisfaction with the lack of uprightness in this world, it's not favorable in any sense. It's aggravating and frustrating and maybe even destructive to us if we don't learn how to handle it. And so what's going on in this beatitude? How can a person who so intensely desires uprightness ever be satisfied when there will not be uprightness, at least for the time in which we live? How could they ever be considered blessed? I think this is the key, and I put it up on the screen. I think this beatitude is a blessing only when we first and foremost, when we personalize it and internalize it before we ever seek to externalize it. We have to first personalize it and internalize it, make it personal to ourselves, and build it up as it is within us, this hunger and thirst, before we ever seek righteousness outside of ourselves. Follow with me. Let me explain what I mean. Intensely desiring righteousness, intensely desiring what is right, must first be actualized and personalized in our own personal lives before we can ever attempt to make what's going on around us right. That makes sense? Allow me to kind of show you what I mean with the rest of our time together. Let's begin with this idea of personalizing and internalizing this beatitude. Since righteousness or justice will only prevail when God governs, when God finally judges, and we dispensationalists, we look forward to that time in God's consummated kingdom. My question to you is this: are you engaged in a personal quest for righteousness right now? Are you on an intense personal quest for uprightness in your own life? We might frame the question this way: are you consumed with being or becoming a righteous person? In other words, are you pursuing the practice of God's holiness in your life? The God who told us, "Be ye holy as I am holy." Are we pursuing the practice of that right now in our lives? We may not be able to do a whole lot about rectifying all the injustices in the world around us, but we have full control of what goes on with ourselves. Are you on a personal quest for righteousness in your life? It's fascinating to me that looking at this beatitude, Jesus framed this character trait in terms of appetite. Appetite. Hunger and thirst. The most basic and the most compelling of our appetites. Without water, without food, we die. Everything within us desires water and food. And again, I'm afraid we really know little about real hunger or thirst in our lives. We consider ourselves hungry if we haven't eaten in the last 4 hours, or maybe the last 40 minutes for some of us. And being thirsty, well, that's something that, we get a little thirsty if we're working out, or, we probably carry a water bottle with us these days. Everybody at the gym has a water bottle, or, some fountain or something close by, and so we get a little thirsty and we go get some water. Or if we're out in the yard, working, and we don't know real hunger and thirst, real hunger and thirst. And the real appetites of genuine hunger and thirst, the physical, the mental, the emotional, the spiritual connections here that Jesus makes in this beatitude, they're very apparent. Hunger and thirst are triggered within us when we sense that we need sustenance for maintenance of our bodies. And certainly for growth. We need water and food to grow as well. And when we're thirsty, our lips and our throats get dry. And if we allow that to continue, then we begin to dehydrate. And as we dehydrate, we begin to experience a whole host of unpleasant symptoms that can ultimately result in death as our systems begin to shut down for lack of water. We need water to live, to grow, to be sustained. And when we're hungry, our stomachs, they begin to growl, don't they? Especially louder in church, right? They always growl louder in church. And if not fed, we become weak and we become emaciated. And systems, again, within our bodies begin to shut down until we get nourishment. Or if we don't, until we starve to death. As we reach a state of thirst and hunger, those appetites within us become very, very strong. We become consumed with satisfying those appetites that become needs. And we're compelled to search out, to seek out, to pursue what will satisfy. And we begin to reach a state of desperation. We may even compromise our values to get what we need to live. At this point of real hunger, real thirst, all of our being becomes committed to that one thing: getting water or getting food, that we might be satisfied and saved. The desperate drive of appetite, That's the metaphor here. Only not for food to feed us or water to hydrate us, but for righteousness. For righteousness to characterize us. That's the analogy that Jesus chose to call us to personal holiness right here in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 6. Listen to me, folks. Listen to me, teens. The only real satisfaction to be found in this world will come if your life is committed to a personal pursuit of holiness. That's the key idea in this whole sermon. The only real satisfaction, I'll say it again, found in this world will come if your life is committed to a personal pursuit of holiness. You can try to find it in other things and in other ways. Look around this room, there's probably people who will testify to that, who have tried to find satisfaction, contentment, peace, happiness, any sense of being blessed by other things and in other avenues of this world. I've tried to find satisfaction, to be filled, in the language of Matthew 5:6, by pursuing other things. And I'm here to tell you there is no satisfaction to be found in any of these. None. You can make your life about a lot of things. You can try to be the most popular. You can try to have the most possessions. You can try to become the most prominent. You can make your life about a lot of things. But there's no satisfaction to be found in any of those. You can try to make your life about pleasure. There's another P word. Satisfaction is not to be found there. There will still be that hole in your soul. The only real satisfaction to be found will come if your life is committed to a personal pursuit of holiness. Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones, he's been singing I Can't Get No Satisfaction for 57 years now. Since 1965, he's been singing I Can Get No Satisfaction. Terrible English. Good song. And he's still singing it because he's not engaged in a pursuit of personal holiness. Trust me. If you try to be filled with anything other than God and the pursuit of righteous living, it'll all come up short. You will not be filled. You will not be satisfied. And there will be destructive consequences in your life. And again, I could probably open the floor for testimonies. We could have some stand up right here in our midst and testify that seeking to find satisfaction apart from God, seeking to find it in the hog pens and the cesspools of sin in this world, it only brings pain and heartache. It only leads to destructive ends. And those who would testify exist as testimonies only of God's grace to redeem and restore. Can I get an amen out there? Yeah. My friends, hunger and thirst. Seek to be filled only in your pursuit of God through fellowship with God that is not hindered by sin in any way. That's where satisfaction is to be found. Don't seek it. Following your appetites in sinful ways. Don't do it. There's no sustaining joy there. Only destruction, only heartache. Let me show you an example of this beatitude in a life. One who hungers and thirsts for what's right. Let me do it again from the Old Testament. You remember last week, and I'm sure you do, when dealing with the previous beatitude of meekness that we saw last week, God declared Moses, you'll remember, to be the meekest man on earth. I put it up there, Numbers chapter 12 and verse 3. The meekest man on earth. It's interesting that Moses is also an example of a person who also hungers and thirsts for what was right. That's Moses' testimony. It's a characteristic that God blessed. Moses didn't always do everything right. He was a sinner just like we are. He blows it. He falls short of God's righteous demands even as we do. He does not live up to the character of a holy God always in his life. But he desired it. He desired it. Let me show you that. You remember Moses had been called up to Mount Sinai, and there he received the greatest blessing of God. It was the standard for righteousness, the standard for righteous living, for uprightness, an upright life. And it reflected God's righteousness, and we call that the law. God's holiness was revealed in the law. And it was revealed so that Moses could in turn communicate that to all of Israel, who would be then responsible to live according to that standard, and would be shown how they did not by that standard. And that's the purpose of the law. And Moses returned from that time up on the mountain where he beheld the glory of God. And in obedience to the command of God, Moses erected a tabernacle. And when that tabernacle was completed, Moses went into it, and he went into the presence of God. And there he voiced this prayer, and I put it on the screen, Exodus 33:13, that reveals the heart of Moses, who has just been overwhelmed by experiencing the glory of God. And here's what Moses prayed. He said, Lord, if you are pleased with me, teach me your ways so that I may know you and continue to find favor. There's that blessing of the Beatitudes. That I may continue to find favor with you. And then he pled with the Lord again in verse 18. I beseech you, Lord, show me your glory. All that Moses had experienced of God and his revealed way of right living, it still didn't satisfy Moses. He had seen things that no other person would see. He had experienced God in a way that most of us sitting here this morning have not. Yet he still wasn't satisfied. He still hungered. He still thirsted for more. It only made him hunger and thirst for more. Moses could have stopped right there and prayed a prayer of thanksgiving at that point. Lord, thank you for all you've revealed to me. But he didn't do that. He prayed for more of you, Lord. Show me more of your glory, more of your holiness, more of your will. I hunger for it. I thirst for it. Lord, give me more. And what did God do? God took Moses and he set him in the cleft of a rock, shaded about by that big boulder. And then he covered Moses over with his hand as well. And lest Moses be consumed or killed by the Shekinah, by the brightness, the intensity of God's glory, God interposed that hand between his glory and Moses, and under the protection of that shield of God's hand and that cleft of the rock, Moses' longing was satisfied as God revealed that expression of his glory. And remember, this came in response to Moses' hunger, Moses' thirst. Show me now thy way, O Lord, that I may know you. Moses intensely longed to experience the righteousness, the right ways of God. He had tasted God's glory, and he only wanted more. The 11th century, Bernard de Clairvaux wrote a hymn titled, Jesus, Thou Joy of Loving Hearts. Put the words up there on the screen from one of the verses. Hunger and thirst, we taste thee, O thou living bread, and long to feast upon thee still. We drink thee, the fountainhead, and thirst our souls from thee to fill. Hunger and thirst for the Lord. You know, on this subject, there are a lot of places we can go. We can see others use this same kind of language, this metaphor. We think about David's psalm where he thirsted for God as the deer thirsted for the water brooks there in Psalm 42, verses 1 and 2. We could echo Paul's intense desire to know God, to know him and Jesus and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings. There in Philippians chapter 3 and verse 10. And we could consider Peter's exhortation to desire the sincere milk of the word, that as we are nourished on it, we may grow thereby in 1 Peter 2 and verse 2. Eating and drinking, sustaining and growing. All of these speak of a desire for God and his will that results in a righteous life of maturity, a life of undistracted fellowship with God. And don't you want that? Don't you want that? Don't you want it so much you can just, pardon the pun, taste it? When righteousness is the object of your appetite. Say that again. When righteousness is the object of your appetite. Not gratification, not pleasure, not indulgence, not personal fulfillment, not all the me and self stuff. But when righteousness is the object of your appetite, when it is that for which you passionately long and yearn and hunger and thirst, then you will be blessed with satisfaction. You will be filled. Internalize and personalize this beatitude. Do I hunger and thirst for righteousness? And when we finally do that, when we finally internalize and personalize this beatitude, only then can we ever be right and healthy in our minds and in our spirits to turn our efforts for justice outward. To externalize this beatitude after we internalize it. Internalize it first. Then turn it outward, externalize it. It's our calling to do that. We who are righteous. It's our calling to have a sanctifying effect on our world. Now we do that primarily through the gospel of Jesus Christ that saves sinners. That's the primary way. Through our witness, our redemptive work for Christ, our mission to make disciples. But we also do that as citizens in our community. Citizens seeking, calling for, insisting upon righteousness and justice and peace. But we have to internalize it and personalize it first. We've got to clean up our own backyard before we start looking at others, right? Does that make sense? It's our calling. There was a former Secretary General of the United Nations. He died in a plane crash over North Rhodesia. And he was on his way to negotiate a ceasefire. His name was Dag Hammarskjöld. And he understood the connection between personal righteousness and then externalizing that desire, in his case, for the world. He devoted his life to doing that, to working for peace and justice in the world. And he wrote a book called Markings. Let me quote this statesman of the world. He said, "Hunger is my native place in the land of passions. Hunger for fellowship, hunger for righteousness, for fellowship founded on righteousness, and a righteousness attained in fellowship. Only life can satisfy the demands for life, and this hunger of mine can be satisfied for the simple reason that the nature of life is such that I can realize my individuality by becoming a bridge for others. I can become a stone," and I love this analogy, "a stone in the temple of righteousness." A stone in the temple of righteousness. That'd be a great lyric in a song. Don't be afraid of yourself, he said. Live your individuality to the full, but for the good of others. Live it for the good of others. Don't copy others in order to buy fellowship or make convention your law instead of living the righteousness. Live the righteousness. When we long for and work for personal righteousness, and then and only then seek to be that stone in the temple of righteousness in our community at large, in the world, only then will we know the measure of satisfaction in this life. The word used for filled or satisfied here at the end of this beatitude, and that's kind of where we are here at the end of this sermon. A.T. Robertson, a Greek scholar of years past, he talked about this word as being a word that was commonly used for the feeding and the fattening up of cattle. So I put the big old cow, fat cow there on the screen because it's a picture. It's a picture. And it's meant to be a picture of contentment. Contentment. Anybody eat Bluebell ice cream? Bluebell ice cream? I love Bluebell ice cream. It's been in Texas for years. It's always been our favorite ice cream. It comes from contented cows. It says it right there in their commercials. Contented cows. That's what that is. It's a picture of contentment, a well-fed, hefty livestock. Satisfied within, contented in soul. And that is only possible if righteousness is what you're feeding on. If it's that for which you hunger and thirst. Hunger and thirst. When the British liberated Palestine, it was a Major V. Gilbert. He wrote an account. It's entitled The Last Crusade. Let me read you an excerpt from it, because it kind of captures this idea of, in this case, thirst and being fulfilled, being satisfied. Driving up from Beersheba, a combined force of British and Australians and New Zealanders were pressing on the rear of the Turkish retreat over an arid desert. The attack outdistanced its water-carrying camel train. Water bottles were empty. The sun blazed piteously out of the sky, and vultures wheeled expectantly. Our heads ached, writes Gilbert. Our eyes became bloodshot and dim in the blinding glare, and our tongues began to swell, and our lips turned purplish black, and then some of them split, some of them burst. Those who dropped out of the column were never seen again. But the desperate force battled on to Sharia. There were wells at Sharia, and they had been unable to take the place by nightfall. Thousands were doomed to die from thirst if they did not take Sharia. We fought that day, wrote Gilbert, as men fight for their lives. We entered Sharia station on the heels of the retreating Turks. The first objects which met our view were the great stone cisterns full of cold, clear drinking water. In the still night air, the sound of water running in the tanks could be distinctly heard, maddening in its nearness. Yet not a man murmured when orders were given for the battalions to fall in, too deep, facing the cisterns. He then describes the stern priorities, those who would drink first, the wounded, those who were on guard duty, and then company by company by company of men. It took 4 hours before the last man had his drink of water. And in all that time, they stood 20 feet from a low stone wall, on the other side of which were thousands of gallons of water. Thirst, satisfaction. Can you imagine that intense thirst on the part of those men who were at the point of death, many of whom had already died? Tongues swollen, lips bursting. That intense thirst for water, so close at hand, so intensely desired. When you and I desire righteousness like that, when we desire righteousness with that kind of desire, then, as we pursue it in our own lives first, and then working to see it in the community around us, then, and only then, can we know any satisfaction. Quest for personal righteousness. Righteousness as the object of our appetite. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Thanks for coming this morning. For those of you who've joined us by live stream, I want to say a very special thank you. Thank you for making time for us again today and for joining us again today. We hope that you will do that again. And we will not be live streaming next week, but the week after that, we will. And if you'd like to make contact with us, that contact information is there on the screen in front of you. I'm Pastor Layne, and you can contact me at Pastor Layne at fellowship-warsaw.org. And you can visit our website and interact there at www.fellowship-warsaw.org. Again, thanks for coming. We'll see you next time. God bless you.